By the way, the long game, I just want to point out as a financial institution is beyond just doing all this work that we're doing, we have the significant opportunity to underwrite and finance the transition, right? And so that to me is like super interesting and exciting. And so the earlier we get involved with these companies and these markets, the better position we are to be the bank that they come to when they need these things or when they're ready for them.
Thanks for tuning in to the Zenergy Podcast. I'm your host, Karan Takhar, and today I'm joined by Brian DiMarino, Deputy Director of Global Sustainability at JP Morgan. We dive into JP Morgan's new all-electric HQ, their sustainability strategies, and how they balance financial goals with environmental impact. Brian shares insights on power purchase agreements, exciting tech trends, partnerships like Climeworks, and his thoughts on nuclear power. Plus, he reveals the title he'd choose for his memoir. It's a great one. Don't forget to subscribe and enjoy this fascinating conversation with Brian DiMarino. Hello, Brian.
How you doing, Karan?
It's so nice to have you on the podcast. Thank you sincerely for taking the time. Really excited to dive into your journey, your work at JP Morgan. And to kick things off, I thought it would be fun to talk about JP Morgan's new HQ building, which is relatively close to where we are in downtown Manhattan. And I was reading online that it has some really exciting cutting edge sustainability features, which would love to hear some of your thoughts on. I know you're involved in the financial aspect of the project.
Yeah.
And during the design phase, were there any particularly fun and surprising sustainability features that came up that you want to highlight here? And also, it'd be really nice to learn a little bit about how the sustainability aspects ultimately tie into the project economics.
Sure. Yeah, no, really appreciate it. Thanks for doing this. Appreciate everything that you guys do on your podcast, and happy to talk about it. It is sort of a labor of love, a large capital project like that, and to just a little bit of my history with the project, and I can talk a little bit about the building itself, is I was the CFO for our America's real estate portfolio when we started the project. So I was in that role probably 8 months or so. And you can imagine my sort of surprise when the idea came up that we might demolish our headquarters. Our original headquarters sat there. It was the Union Carbide building, originally built in the late 1950s, finished in 1960. And the idea that we would tear that building down and build a new building where it stood. And so as the CFO, you sort of immediately go, well, what's this going to cost? And so we spent quite a long time working through the complexities of that. And as we were doing it, starting to layer in some of the things you're talking about, which is, well, we're building a building for the next 100 years, right, or more. And so how do you build that building for the future and not for today? And one of the massive complexities with real estate construction in general is that these buildings effectively are out of date the second that you move into them. And what I mean by that is every decision you make about that building, what will be inside of that building, how it's built, the materials selected, the central plan, all those things get made years before they're actually installed. And therefore, they're sort of whatever technology is available at that time. And so I have to say our team is really, really good. And Tishman Spire is building the building for us, and Norman Foster is the architect. And the collaboration between the groups to make sure that we are building a building for the future is really, really something that's come out. And so every one of those design decisions takes that into account. And they really sort of, I don't want to say wait till the last minute, but they work really hard to make sure that what we're putting into the building will be the best possible technology for the future. So it's been incredible. I think a couple of things maybe to highlight, and there's a lot of things no one will ever see about that building that are sort of climate forward. For one, the majority of the steel is electric arc smelted steel. So we use electricity, not fossil fuels, to actually smelt the steel. That's true for most of the steel above sort of the lobby level. The very low steel is highly structural. It holds up the weight of the entire building, obviously. So it's just a different process. Most of the concrete uses something called ground glass pozzolan. So It's a much more climate-friendly concrete product. All the stuff you would expect, triple glazed windows, things like that. But also we do heat recovery. We're doing water recovery, lots of stuff like that. And most importantly, the building is all electric. It is the first all-electric building in New York City. And what's important about that is you can't green fossil fuels. So if you can remove the fossil fuels needed to operate a building, you can work to green the grid that provides the electricity of that building, but you can't green the fossil fuels if you're using natural gas or heat oil or things like that. And so what we're generally trying to do is if we can shift to electricity, you hear this word electrification all the time. You can shift to electricity, you can green the grid. That's really complicated, but it's sort of a move in the right direction. And so anyway, it's been, like I said, a really incredible project and something I've been really excited to be a part of. But, we started that project, 2018, 2019. So it's been a while, and it's exciting to see it now at full height and getting closed in.
Yeah.
So.
And as I was mentioning a little bit before we got on, is absolutely beautiful.
Thank you. I take no credit for that. As you might expect, the way that those things are figured out is through something called the design competition. And so we had, I want to say 7 or 8 architects submit designs, and ultimately we chose Norman Foster, who's just, he's a celebrity in the architect world, and the building is beautiful. So thank you.
Yeah, no, it really is. And I was reading, and you somewhat touched upon this, about how it's 100% sourced from renewable energy.
Yep.
Hydroelectric plant, correct?
Yeah, so we designed a solution. So New York City is, the electric grid in New York City is called Zone J. Zone J, as you could imagine, New York City is very populous and very dense. There's nowhere to put vast fields of solar panels or large wind farms. And so one of the struggles we have in New York City is how do you get green power to New York City? Right? How do you bring that power typically from upstate New York in the what's called the New York Independent Service Operator area, the New York ISO? How do you bring that power to New York City? And so what we did was design a solution in partnership with Brookfield Renewables, who runs hydroelectric assets in upstate New York, to actually schedule the power down to New York City in concert with the demand of the building.
Got it.
So when the building is online and operating, we will be measuring how much power it's drawing in, and we'll be taking off power from those hydroelectric assets. So it's really interesting solution trying to solve this problem that New York City is going to have for a long period of time. The other thing that will be interesting, we haven't really talked very publicly about yet, but is we're going to work on doing some community solar projects in the city in support of the building as well. Awesome. And so think about putting solar on some large warehouse spaces in the outer boroughs and things like that.
Got it. Yeah, I actually had the chance to recently interview someone from the New York Green Bank. They were mentioning how they recently financed a pretty significantly sized community solar project in the city. So exciting to hear that you're also attempting to play in that space. And regarding the hydroelectric plant, I know that when you were the CFO of JP Morgan's Real Estate Americas portfolio, that also was during a time when JP Morgan was able to hit that 100% renewable electricity target. And would love to hear a little bit about whether there were any challenges in terms of being able to procure, because I imagine there are a lot of real estate assets under the JP Morgan portfolio. So I feel like being able to procure that amount of power must have posed some challenges, or maybe not. And would just love to hear what that experience was like.
It did and it didn't. And maybe the way we talk about it today is a little different than we did when we first achieved that target in 2020, but we really started doing that procurement in 2017. Power purchase agreements are already complicated in and of themselves. And, corporates didn't for a long, long time get involved in that stuff. But in this age of trying to bring new renewables onto the grid, it started to make a lot of sense for corporates to align their offtake with these renewable projects. And so developing power purchase agreements in partnership with project developers and green assets really made a lot of sense. To your point, it is a little bit complicated. Our footprint is distributed. We've got 460 corporate sites around the world. We operate in 60 countries, 200 cities. We've got 5,000 branches in the United States, the Chase brand branches. We operate in all of the 48 lower states in the branch portfolio, and we've got data centers. And so those things are spread out all over the place and in different grids and interconnections and stuff like that. And so the first step was, well, where do we have a concentration of power? And the first step was in Texas. So we looked at ERCOT, and we found a wind farm that was being developed in the ERCOT area, which supported the development of a campus we were building in Plano, and a bunch of other assets we already had, and expansion of our branch portfolio. So really, we just started there. But I'll say, look, power purchase agreements are complicated for a lot of reasons. For one, they're market exposed, right? So even as a bank, a financial institution where we really understand the exposure to commodity markets like energy markets, you're taking on a lot of market risk in a part of the firm that doesn't typically do that. That's not what we do as a corporate function. We build and operate the firm for the firm, but we don't typically take on that kind of risk. That's for our banking teams and our desks to do. And so there was a lot of sort of learning within our teams about what this was. There's a lot of partnership with those front office teams I was talking about, like our commodities desk, but they're not, sort of for the faint of heart. They are hard to do. They're long-term contracts. You're signing yourself up for anywhere from 10 to 20 years of that market dynamic, whatever it might be. And you have to have a lot of conviction in what you're doing. And so,
Makes sense.
And then the last piece I'll say is it's a ton of competition. A lot of corporates, and we know the hyperscalers are really big in this space, but there's a lot of corporates who want to buy these kind of assets or put their name on these assets. And so that's great, but also it's hard as an individual corporate. And JP Morgan's pretty big in a lot of ways, but actually as a power off-taker, we're not that big. And so we find ourselves in the sort of unnatural position for our firm of being sort of the small fish in the big pond. And so trying to pick our moments is been
Makes
tough,
a lot
but
of sense.
it's interesting.
And from those PPAs, did you find that there were benefits in terms of cost savings on the electricity side?
Yeah, well, yes and no, right? So a lot of the way that the PPAs are designed is their contracts are different. So effectively, you agree on what you think the future price of power is going to be, and so it could be higher or lower than that in any 15-minute increment, as an example. And so we're either paying the difference or we're getting paid for the difference. It's sort of how those contracts work. However, there is a benefit to a lot of the things that we have done, like on-site solar and things like that, where we're no longer exposed to power markets and we're generating our own electricity. And so we found there's a lot of payback in doing large-scale on-site solar. For instance, in Columbus, Ohio, we have a very large campus there that's relatively flat. It's almost like our headquarters building, but like laid on its side. A lot of roof space, a lot of parking lot. Perfect for solar, exactly. And so we have covered that entire roof with solar. We have built a parking structure over the parking lots and covered that with solar. And so it's one of the largest, I'm going to say it's in the top 3 now, on-site solar arrays in the world. And while there's a capital spend to do that, there's payback, and it happens very quickly depending on the scale of the project. Now it's really high scale or big scale. So that one, probably from a power perspective is paying us back like in year 2 or something like that. Wow. So really valuable.
That's a quick payback period.
Exactly. Incredible. Now the smaller the arrays get, the longer the payback periods get. So you start putting them on branches and stuff like that. It takes longer, but to your point, we think through the economics of all these things, right? We're trying to do the best thing for the environment, but also for the firm, right? We're a publicly traded company. We have shareholders and investors and clients and everything else. And so trying to find that balance between stakeholders and the climate is very important. So spending corporate resources responsibly is what we're generally focused on.
Yeah, which I really do want to dive into in a few questions from now in order to get a sense of how you figure out that balance, because I imagine there's so many different stakeholders who have different priorities. And in your current role, I know you're probably navigating that dynamic pretty constantly.
Yep.
But before getting to that, I'd love to just learn about what inspired your shifts over from the real estate side to now the sustainability side.
Yeah. Inspired. I guess inspired is actually maybe a good word. Yeah. No, inspired is probably a good word. I grew up in the Hudson Valley of New York State. So it's about an hour and a half north of New York City. And, I grew up around hiking trails and around the Hudson River. And, I was always outdoors as a kid. And I always cared about the environment. And as I went through college a couple decades ago, it was something that people talked about, but not quite as much as we do today. We talked about global warming then. We talk about climate change now. So the marketing has changed a little bit. But I cared. I just didn't ever think I was going to a science field or anything like that. I always saw myself in the business world. And so if you asked me when I started at JP Morgan almost 20 years ago if I would do anything in the climate space, I would have told you were nuts. And here I am. And so
I think a lot of people would fall in that bucket.
I think that's right. And actually, by the way, I think for whatever it's worth, there's a balance of people who work in corporates that are doing this type of work that either come through the corporate world and have the business background and have learned the climate side, or people who come from the climate side and are learning the business side. And when those people are able to work together, I actually think you make the most progress because you really have to understand both aspects of it.
Makes a lot of sense.
But truthfully, it was when I was in that CFO role and I was doing some of this work around power purchase agreements and stuff like that. And I had a conversation with our then chief administrative officer, who's since retired, and just said, I don't think we're doing enough here, like in this space. And he sort of said, what do you mean? And I said, I'm really not sure. Like, I'm not an expert in this. It just feels to me like we should be doing more. And so he said, well, why don't I let you hire one person to start thinking through this a little bit? I know you have a full-time job. And so I did. That was probably late 2020 that we did that. So during the pandemic and everything else going on, he still, I think this is one of the great things about JP Morgan, not that this is a pitch about JP Morgan, but it's a place where people recognize opportunity and we don't sort of shy away from investment when we think it's the right thing to do. And so,
it's about to have a brand new, beautiful building.
Right. Yep. And so anyway, we seeded what we then called the operational sustainability team. We started looking at other corporates, other financial institutions, and what was going on in the space, and really found that there was an opportunity. We were probably a laggard in this space. And so very quickly figured out what it would take to step forward, step into the light and get involved. And we did. And so by mid 2021, we had public targets that we were focused on, like 100% renewable energy, and which actually we had before 2021, but carbon neutrality and a bunch of other stuff, EVs, water, waste, stuff like that. And that just sort of blossomed into, okay, well, now that we have these things, we have to go get them. And so the team went from 1 person to 3 people to 5 people to, by the end of 2023, by the end of last year, it was probably almost 20 people.
Wow.
And at that time, we made a decision to combine what was the operational sustainability team focused on JP Morgan Chase. It's like from the inside out, and the corporate sustainability team, which was focused on, like in the corporate responsibility world, focused on sort of the external presence of the firm in the space and bring them together. And so I sit here as the deputy director of sustainability. I report to the head of sustainability for the firm. So it's been a journey, but not one that I sort of would have planned, I suppose. But, but yeah.
That's amazing. And what does your day-to-day look like?
I'm
sure it probably varies.
It does, but there are some, constants. To be honest with you, like one of the things I think everyone at my level does. So in banking, we have sort of analyst, associate, vice president, executive director, managing director. And as you sort of move up that scale over the years, you become a little less focused on day-to-day and a little more focused on team in the firm. And so at my level, I spend a lot of time on my team, actually. What's the team up to? What are they focused on? Career, stuff like that. So that actually is like a constant that is like a foundation for every day. There's at least one-on-one with one of my directs every day. I try to spread them out. There's team meetings, there's stuff like that. But from a climate perspective, it does vary a lot. But like I said, there are consistencies. And so a lot of it is, how do you sort of find that balance? I think that's the word that constantly is running through my head, balance, right? And so continuing to lean in to be, the responsible company that we are, but doing that while managing the resources of the firm. And there has to be a constant balance. There's constantly a push-pull. We lean in, but we have to, but we have to then check ourselves and lean in and check ourselves. And so there's always this back and forth. So, but it's great. And like I said, I think one of the things I've truly enjoyed about being in this space and at this firm, and I've been here a long time, so it's that's a testament to it, is, the leadership of this firm is very honest and open about these things, and they're willing to sit there and listen to you and say, okay, I don't understand this, you seem to, let's get together and figure it out. And so I think that's been really, really, really satisfying for me in my career.
Yeah, I saw that you went on a trip recently to Kansas City on
yes.
like this bus tour.
Yeah, I did.
Looked exciting.
Yeah, it was really fun. That was so we went and visited a company called Orange EV. So Orange EV is the only company right now that is building EV trucks to be used in like ports. So they're I'm like blanking on the name of the type of truck, but they're like the trucks that drive around warehouses and ports and stuff like that.
What type of truck that was? Like a
so they're meant to move like containers and things around like ports and warehouses and stuff like that. They don't really go out on the roads. They're just meant for that sort of. And actually, the EV is a very it's a great solution. It's like almost purpose built for it. So like you look at that type of trucking, any type of trucking, you go, we need a diesel engine. You have to have a diesel engine. Like that's what you need. And then, if you spend time talking to the folks that actually operate those things, there's the smokestack is half a foot behind the driver. blowing smoke all the time. And these guys come out dirty and have all kinds of some of them wear masks and earplugs and stuff. And then you hop in this thing and you turn the switch on and it makes almost no noise and there's no exhaust and it's super smooth and there's a ton of torque and they can pull 130,000 or something like that pounds. Wow. And yeah, they're just incredible. And so we had our CEO, Jamie Dimon, who does a bus tour every year in different areas of the country. And this year he chose sort of the heartland of America. And in passing through Kansas City, we had an opportunity to have him come on site, and he did a tour of their facility and sat down with the co-founders of that company to understand what they're looking to do and what they're up to, and actually a very cool partnership they have with the local community college there to develop jobs. And I think that's something we don't talk a lot about as a firm, but one of the things that we think is super important from an economic perspective, and so as a bank we care a lot about, is job creation. And that's not jobs like mine or whatever job you end up in, but it is jobs like that in the heartland of America. And how do you find good, high-paying, secure jobs for people who have high school degrees or just 2-year college degrees or whatever? And so that was a really, really awesome moment for us.
It sounds it. Yeah, I used to work at the Department of Energy, and whenever the secretary would talk about the importance of climate, she would always emphasize the job piece. Be like, this is about jobs. It's like the number one priority. Yeah,
it's super important. I mean, we talk a lot about supply chains and how to get materials to where they need to be to actually build the things we're going to need in the future. But you got to have someone to build them.
Yeah,
those materials 100%. Can show up on site, and not only does someone have to drive the trucks and operate the cranes and everything else, but you need the men and women to actually put these things together and have the knowledge and all that stuff. And so it's a big challenge we're going to face in this country as we go through a transition, in the world really, but in this country as we go through a transition.
Yeah, 100%. And one of the challenges likely will largely include navigating the political dynamics and shifting back to the process of navigating the balance of the financial benefits with the sustainability benefits. I imagine at an institution like JP Morgan, there are probably a lot of people who might be like purely focused on the financing side, and as a result might not take the sustainability elements as seriously. So would love to just get a sense as someone who's on the inside, like what challenges you've seen come up on the back end as it pertains to this issue, and whether there are any particularly effective strategies that you've found to help persuade people on why integrating sustainability might make sense from an operational standpoint.
Yeah, by the way, some of this answer is going to bleed into the finance side of the house and the operational side a little bit, but I think I certainly haven't found a silver bullet on how to do these things, but what I think is very important is that there is a very robust understanding across JP Morgan Chase, and I would say financial institutions broadly, that a smart, thoughtful transition to a lower carbon economy is here. It is actually happening. I think where we get caught up a lot, banks get caught up a lot, is in this idea that instantaneous defunding of any one industry is going to solve the problem. It won't. It will create its own problems, its own issues. And so we have got to start to figure out what a path forward looks like. And that path will take some time. And I think there needs to be an understanding of what the role of everyone is in these things, what the role of banks are, what the role of oil and gas companies is, what the role of governments is, what the role of, climate tech is, what the role of people are, in their day-to-day lives. And I think if we can start to work that out and give people a little bit of grace in doing what they do every day, I think we might actually make a lot more progress a lot quicker. And so I can say from an individual decisioning perspective, at least on the operational side, we have purposely focused on those projects that pay back fastest, right? So the projects with the best economics to prove, right? We're making a point that these things are actually beneficial. And some of the technologies we're looking at now are getting more and more expensive because we sort of have taken off the low-hanging fruit, if you will. And so those next projects are a little bit more expensive, pay back a little bit longer, maybe don't pay back at all, things like that. And so as we look forward, we're starting to ask ourselves exactly the question you're asking, which is, what is the right next step? Where would we put the next tranche of capital? What is the right next thing to do? What will prove a point? What will seed a market? What will provide a lift to a new climate tech company or to a startup, or prove to the real estate industry or the travel industry that something's possible? And so we're trying to balance all those equities when we do these things. One of the things that we're very focused on as we do that is how do you manage unabated emissions, right? So like pretty much every large corporate now publishes or releases its emissions profile in something we call our environmental data table, typically in our climate report or ESG report, depending on the company. But so we have those emissions listed and reported and measured. Okay, fine. And as we're working on this journey to decarbonize our businesses, however we're looking to do that, that stuff takes time, right? That solar project I talked about, massive project, it's significantly important to our emissions reduction. However, from, concept to approval to construction completion and commissioning of that solar array, probably 3.5 years. Right. And so like over those 3.5 years, that building is still producing emissions through scope 2 emissions, pulling energy off the grid. And so one of the things we've done is we've looked to the voluntary carbon markets to say, how do we manage unabated emissions right now while we're on this journey to remove those emissions? And so that's been one of the other equities we balance is, okay, well, there's a price to those carbon credits. And so whether it's a nature-based credit, all removal credits, we focus on removal. So that the math nets out, right? So one -1 to 1 + 1 is 0. You could buy a carbon credit for like a high quality nature-based removal credit, probably in the $30 to $40 range. You could buy engineered carbon removal, like direct air capture or things like that, in the $800 to $1,000 range. And so building a thoughtful approach to addressing the carbon markets is also important to us. And so how do you build a portfolio that brings that overall price down, but still supports the market broadly? These things are hard, to your point. And you use the word persuade. I might challenge that word a little bit. I actually don't think I've had to persuade anyone to do anything.
I was trying to find the right word, actually. I'm not sure
Honestly,
that was the best
word. It's probably educate, right? Like I said, when you start to bring these conversations up with the senior most people at the firm, they don't close the door on you. They go, come in and let's talk about it. And they're trying to understand it and get to know it and wrap their head around it and see where the opportunities
Makes a lot of sense.
By the way, the long game, I just want to point out as a financial institution is beyond just doing all this work that we're doing, we have the significant opportunity to underwrite and finance the transition, right? And so that to me is like super interesting and exciting. And so the earlier we get involved with these companies and these markets, the better position we are to be the bank that they come to when they need these things or when they're ready for them.
A lot to unpack there in terms of, because there's so many different ways I want to take this. But you mentioned that JP Morgan has managed to hit a lot of the low-hanging fruits, and you're trying to figure out what the next phase of investment within this area is. Are there any particularly exciting technologies that you and the team are keeping your eyes on?
A couple of dynamics and answers to your question. So for one, we're fortunate. So the reverse of what I just said, in that we will be able to finance and support these things as they come ready, is that we also have businesses that are focused on smaller scale companies today, like, at their growth stage or the sort of middle market stage. And so we're able to work with those banking teams where they're able to bring us opportunities and say, hey, there's this company that's developed this new battery technology or this new power generation technology or this new heat pump or this new whatever, and to start looking at those things and figure out where we might be able to apply them. We've worked with this one company called Phononic where we've installed the first in the US. It's like a pilot concept project in like one conference room, but it's effectively a compressorless heating and cooling system. It just uses microchips. And I'm not going to pretend to understand the technology well enough to explain it here, but like imagine being able to cool the room we're sitting in without having a compressor. You don't need refrigerants. You don't need as much power. You don't need any of that stuff. But you can easily cool or heat this room with the same technology just by reversing the flow of the current.
Wow.
And so those types of things are super interesting to us. And so we're super excited about those types of things. The truth of the matter is most of these technologies, the science has already been sort of figured out. It's a question of sort of who's going to take that science, put it into a commercial model, and bring that commercial model to the market and scale it. And so I think some of the old tech actually probably has, again, that thing I just described to you is like, I think a lot of old computer scientists would probably describe that as like a parlor trick back in the 80s and 90s. Today, actually, it could be a solution to solving some of our emissions challenges. And so, the other place that I am personally very interested is in the nuclear space. And I think the word nuclear tends to gin up some uncomfortabilities in people. But
there's a big announcement today.
There was a big announcement. Yeah, I think it was yesterday, actually, the Microsoft announcement, or last week, whatever it was, that Microsoft was partnering with, I forget who exactly, I forget, Constellation. And they're going to reopen one of the reactors at 3 Mile Island. And immediately, I think that, like I said, it sort of brings back some uncomfortable memories for people who lived through what happened there a good long time ago now. But what I think we need to understand about nuclear is, for one, there is new technologies, a new generation of nuclear technology that is very different from the light water reactors that were built in the 60s and 70s or earlier in this country and around the world. They are inherently safe. They operate differently. A lot of them are not pressurized. And so there's a bunch of things that change the way that they work. And so it's not as if by re-energizing a reactor, we're just taking one that was sitting there and someone just like flipping a switch and turning it back on. That reactor, along with, there was one in Michigan that was announced recently that will be brought back online. But those things will be significantly upgraded for all kinds of reasons to make them, match up with the needs of today and the safety issues of the past and things like that. And the Nuclear Regulatory Commission will be all over it, you can be assured. And so, but nuclear power is, for all intents and purposes, baseload, consistent, carbon-free power that, by the way, sits on a very small footprint. It's highly concentrated. So like what might take you 8,000 acres of solar panels can take up 5 acres in nuclear power. And so you start thinking about replacement of coal power. And there's actually some projects happening today where you're siting a small modular nuclear reactor right next to a coal plant. You use the same infrastructure. Once the reactor is built, you interconnect it, you shut down the coal plant, you can build another reactor right next to it. And you've already got the interconnection right there. And so I think the opportunity for nuclear to be a benefit to this country and others and decarbonizing is actually pretty significant.
I think a lot of people share that point of view on nuclear, at least more so now than in the past. One common critique of nuclear, and I'm no nuclear expert by any means, that I've heard people express is that it's too expensive on a unit cost basis. And
a lot of that comes from, it's unfortunate. We build reactors very seldomly. And so the last couple of reactors that were built in this country were reactors 3 and 4 at a site called Vogtle in Georgia. And they were significantly over budget, right? No one's going to argue that. There's a lot of analysis that has shown that reactor 4 was much less over budget than reactor 3 was. And so there's a lot of analysis that says if we built another reactor the same size and scale, it would be significantly under budget, actually, from where they budgeted those. And so some of this comes down to the learning. And we talked a little bit about jobs before. Some of this comes down to people, right? Like the people who built reactor 3 and then built reactor 4 learned. And if they went and built another one somewhere else, that same team of people, those same project managers, those same engineers, it would be cheaper. And then the next one, the next one. But because it takes us so long to do the next one and the next one and the next one in this country, it takes us 10, 15 years to approve a reactor, you lose that intellectual property. And so we start to slip, and then you go back and the people building that next one are going to be newer to it. And so, those people will have retired or moved on with their careers or
makes sense
or whatever. And so
we do need to build complicated, very technical.
It's super technical, and we need to build the flywheel a little bit, right? This has to start moving a little bit faster. The only other point I'll make here that I think is important, small modular and micro reactors give us an opportunity to do these things on a much smaller scale and therefore at smaller cost. And so an overrun on a $100 million project is significantly different than an overrun on a $15 billion project. And not to say that overruns are good, but you can learn faster on smaller projects. And you can imagine a world where you can start to produce micro reactors almost in a warehouse and sort of bring them on site and connect them the way we do with batteries today. And so I do think there's a lot of new tech and a lot of new opportunities to move that market forward.
On your previous point about having the science behind a lot of these technologies being there, but now there just needs to be a major effort to commercialize a lot of the science. I was reading that JP Morgan recently formed a $20 million partnership with Climeworks on carbon capture. And that's another technology that's in its early phase, but has momentum behind it. I think it would be informative for people to get a sense of like what the economics look like for that project.
So that partnership with Climeworks was a part of a larger $200 million commitment that we made to engineered carbon removal. We announced that last May 2023. That was with Climeworks, a company called Charm Industrial. So Climeworks is direct air capture. Charm Industrial does something called bio-oil sequestration, where they produce bio-oil from biogenic feedstocks like corn stover, so leftover sort of agricultural waste. They turn to an oil and they inject that into well sites. Direct air capture is removing carbon dioxide from ambient air, so sucking air in just from the atmosphere, and compressing that and storing it underground. And then another company called CO280, which takes biogenic sources from pulp and paper mills. So pulp and paper mills are already taking biogenic sources to produce paper. Instead of letting that carbon dioxide be released through the flue gases, they divert those flue gases into a carbon capture technology and compress it and store it. And so you can see the pattern. And by the way, the other thing we did was we joined a group of other buyers called Frontier to advance the market. And so all in, it was $200 million. The reason why we did what we did, and the reason why I'm describing all those things, is the goal was to build a portfolio, right? Not to just do one thing, but to build a portfolio. And so if you start to build a portfolio, and I was mentioning this before, of carbon removal technologies, you can start to bring the average price down per ton of what it costs you to do these things. So some of the things are on the higher end. They're going to be much more expensive. Some of the things are on the lower end. And if you start to overweight to the lower end, you start to build this portfolio where you can start to say, hey, for $200 million, we're removing 800,000 tons of CO2 from the atmosphere, which most people will look at the engineered carbon space and say, oh, I thought it was $1,000 a ton. I thought it was $800 a ton. Take those numbers and do the math, and you realize it doesn't need to be that expensive, and you can still support the market across the spectrum. And so, by the way, and I mentioned this before, and I think it's important, JP Morgan's not just doing offtake from Climeworks. JP Morgan also helped do a private capital raise for them. And so, I think what again is important is the partnership between different parts of JP Morgan, the front office and the corporate side as a buyer, to be able to invest in these things, help others invest in these things, and also help prove that the offtake is real and available. And so we think that's been a huge success. We hope to announce more of those deals in the near future.
Looking forward to reading about them, maybe bringing you back. And shifting gears a little bit, now to your incredible career journey, which is inspiring. And I know there are a lot of listeners who would love to similarly get into the finance side, work at an incredible institution like JP Morgan, and then change roles within and join the sustainability team. Is there any piece of advice that you would give to someone, actually a few different sets of people? So one piece of advice to someone who is looking to enter at the entry level, like what skills do you generally look out for? How do you recommend they get their foot in the door? And then secondly, a piece of advice for someone who might be a little more established, is looking to change like where within the climate field they operate, and are looking to transition over to an institution like a JP Morgan or similar.
Yeah, so I think on the sort of early entrant career sort of side of things, there is a lot of opportunity in the climate space, but I think there's a ton of value in building some, knowledge about whatever industry you're interested in. So I actually think, while climate is super interesting as a topic, and I think it brings out a lot of passion in people, I would figure out if there is something else that you're super interested in. Could be cars, could be sports, I don't care, doesn't matter. Build some foundation in that, and then try to bring the climate into it. And I think that, to me, is a much more interesting way to go about it. There's not to say there aren't jobs in the climate space. There certainly are. A lot of them are science focused, or they're in the NGO community or things like that. And that's all fine, right? We are actually partners with all of those people, and we love them all. But I think that there's a ton of opportunity to take something you're also passionate about and bring climate to it, and accept the fact that it will take you a few years to build to that. And I'm going to, say, don't be impatient if you can avoid it. But then again, if 20 years ago, someone said, hey, at some point in your career, you're going to be the deputy head of sustainability for the largest bank in the world, I'd be like, I want to be there now. And so I understand why there's an impatience and an excitement to get there, but just recognize that, every year you go through your career, you're building expertise you can lean on and that you can offer to that future job. Like one of the things that I think makes me valuable in the role that I'm in is that I was a CFO of multiple operating businesses within JP Morgan. And so I understand how JP Morgan thinks about money, thinks about his P&L, thinks about business cases. Like it helps in moving things forward. It helps me speak the lingo and understand the conversation and figure out what the challenges are going to be and help unstick the stickiness. And so I think that that's important. If you're, 5, 10, 20 years into your career and you're thinking about getting into the climate space, climate's everywhere. So not that differently from where what I was talking about with the entry level stuff, climate's everywhere. Just figure out where it is in your world, in your business, and, build those stepping stones into a job. I spent many years in our private bank and finance where I didn't see many opportunities in the climate space. And then, but I was always interested in it, like I said. And then when I got into the corporate side of the world and I started seeing this real estate world and I started seeing energy use and I started seeing power purchase agreements and seeing solar projects, and I started to realize, wow, actually there's an opportunity. And so built those stepping stones. And so, and the other thing, the last piece to both groups, ask a ton of questions. People love to answer questions. Actually, it doesn't make you look ignorant or stupid or anything like that. Just ask questions. People want you to be interested in what they're interested in. And so, if you get a chance to be mentored by or network with someone who's in the climate space, ask them how they got there and ask them about the science, ask them about things that seem simple to them because it's not to everyone else. And it will remind them that they need to be talking to people like you more to sort of bring this stuff to the populace.
If you were to write a book on your career, what would you title it? And why?
I don't think anyone would read it,
I'd read
but
it.
That's good. One copy sold. But
Jay would read it.
I sort of. That's good. Okay, our sound engineer is going to read it, so we've got 2 now. So I'll have to start writing. I used the word unexpected before. I might call it like unexpectations or something like that. I had no expectation of ending up in the career that I'm in now. And I think in some ways that maybe, not to like wax philosophical, but maybe that makes me more thankful for it every day. Like I truly do, get out of bed in the morning and pop up onto my feet and get excited for what the day has to hold and even all the challenges that come with it. But I never expected it. I think maybe the Mighty Mouse subtitle or other title, I'm dating myself. Mighty Mouse was a cartoon back in the day, and they'd always have like a title for the next episode and then like another title. Anyway, it doesn't matter. Somebody once called me an agitator. And I don't think an agitator like that I annoy people. I think more the agitator like in a washing machine, but the idea that like
get it done. Right?
I tend to like ask the weird question or like pose the crazy idea or whatever. And I think in a lot of ways that's helped me in my career because maybe if I had like another piece of advice to give, it would just be wanted in the room. Right. And so like, whether that's through being a little quirky or funny or being the smartest person in the room or having the big idea, it doesn't matter. Right? You need that diversity of thought in every room to get anything done. And leaders know that, and the best leaders will always do that. Be someone that everyone wants in the room. And if you're in the room, you're going to be a part of the conversation. You'll be able to help drive things forward. So unexpectations, I think, is my...
Unexpected. Like it.
Yeah.
I'm gonna submit my pre-order.
Yeah, good. I'll let Amazon know
Thank
it's
you,
coming.
Brian. Seriously, this was an incredible conversation. I learned so much. Sincerely appreciate you taking the time and look forward to just following the amazing developments of your team. And do you have any closing thoughts you'd like to leave us with?
No, I really appreciate, like I said, I appreciate you guys doing this. I think getting these conversations out into the podcast space and in front of new viewers and or listeners in this case, I think is super important. The climate challenge that is in front of us is not easy, but it will take smart people, rational people, pragmatic people who are willing to actually move this stuff forward. To get involved. And so I would just say, do that. Listen to these podcasts, read the articles, understand what companies are doing, understand both sides of the equation. There's a scientific side of this equation and there's a commercial side. And I think we've listened to the science for a really long time and it is accurate. No one's arguing with it. But if we don't balance that with the commercial equities of the global economy, we will struggle to get things done. And we have got to figure out how to marry those two things and to live, happily together. And I think that to me is the ultimate goal in all of this. So
thank you. Thank you so much.
Thanks, man.
It was great.
Thanks so much for checking out the Zenergy Podcast. If you enjoyed today's episode, please take a moment to rate and subscribe to the podcast. It would mean so much to me and the rest of the team. We release episodes every Thursday, so stay tuned for all new episodes featuring industry leaders building a cleaner, greener future for us all. See you next time.